Samantha Lee, thank you so much for joining us on the Forward podcast. It is great to have you.
You're welcome. I'm very happy and honored to be here as well.
It's beautiful. Thank you. To help our listeners get to know you that little bit better, I'm wondering if you would mind telling us a little bit about what drives you forward in both your life and your career.
So, at a surface level, I talk a lot at conferences about financial inclusion, which is ensuring that we get people who are unbanked and the poor access to safe and accessible financial services. I think more broadly, though, I was thinking, and as I was reflecting on the question as well, and like what's like, I mean, I can just say that too, and I can talk about my story, which I did when you first interviewed me. But I think I'm broadly more interested, also interested, like what drives this, like behind, like the ultimate thing that drives me is I'm interested in like the nature of power and influence and who gets to have it and who doesn't, and how, and if it's truly systemic and who decides. Maybe it's a little bit like a little Marxist socialist a little bit, but like I and I think it's part of my personal story and just like my own observations, like living in society where I was like in an environment that was extremely poor, and then like in my life now where I'm with like some of the most like powerful, sometimes surrounded by people who are extremely powerful, and that disparity. So maybe that's like the ultimate thing, and like wondering why the bottom 10% or 1%, they get nothing, or they get really predatory kinds of services, and everyone seems to be okay with that. So that I would say that is
Yeah,
like the ultimate thing that drives me as a person.
there's a so I a bit of background for our audience listening today. I got to meet Samantha Lee. I got to meet you at Money 2020 Asia, and I mentioned this in a previous episode, which you can go and listen to, about Money 2020. I found myself walking into a stage called the Unfiltered stage, which was a space to have candid conversations, to speak openly about the things that we may not get to always hear about at conferences. And I came across you, and I still think about your talk, and I still think about your story, and I could see that fire in your belly when you're talking about financial inclusion and how important it is. Given your history, you can tell that that's such a beautiful compass that drives you. And I want to then just ask you a bit more about that personal mission of yours, because you are having these incredible candid conversations at conferences around the world talking about financial inclusion. So would you mind telling us that personal message a bit more, and how it comes into your day-to-day life too?
Oh, yes, sure. So, with why I'm passionate about addressing systemic inequality that we have in the world and how we can do it through the work that we do in financial services. I'll just recap in case people didn't hear the previous versions. But I had, so in my life, I had a situation where, initially my life was pretty good. My father was working, my mother was at home. And then when I was about it was like 9, maybe 10, like I was in a situation where my father lost his job. He couldn't re-enter the workforce in a sustainable way, and my mother had to start working, and we had to move into a really poor, unsafe neighborhood of I live in the United States, so in Chicago where I live. And like that experience of like losing everything and being in the depths of poverty, and and even like this, I just remember viscerally, like, and it's such a far experience from my life now, but even that experience of like people looking at you like either like you're invisible or like you're nothing. I completely know what that feels like. And yeah, I remember I couldn't even afford, I don't know if I talked about this, but I couldn't even afford like pretty clothes. I remember like dreaming in my teens, like, oh my God, like when I, like looking at the people and like on television and just like those like women in New York or something, and with London, and I was like wishing that was my life. And it felt like such a far, it's so interesting because I live in like, a high-rise apartment now in city center, and I would never have imagined that this would have happened to me. But
Yeah.
so that was that experience. And And I always had an interest in like social impact as well, and I considered a career path in like nonprofits until but yeah, luckily through university education I was able to get a job in the private sector. And somehow I lost my way until like a few years ago, and I think I can share that experience as well, maybe in another question or in this one, but just when I started to learn about this topic and it tied to that piece of my history, when with these populations, and it's like I guess it was mirroring that experience I had of people like looking at me like I was like nothing, like I didn't, I was just like I wasn't worth their time because I looked poor. And the way that the financial services that we have also looks at poor people in either
Mm.
in developed or emerging economies in the same way, like they're just domestic helpers, or they're just not even worth and kind of concentrating all their efforts into like the top echelons of society. So that's like what ties into that personal mission, is like feeling it, and then like seeing it, and wanting to do something about it.
Yeah, having like a full 360 view of where that moment potentially was for you, realizing that a system isn't working the way it should be. And you touched on that there, and I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that when you headed into university and came across that topic. Would you mind telling us a bit more about how that then shifted a rethink in your mind looking at those systems?
I should say so that this happened about 2 years ago, and it's so funny. Like, even though I speak a lot about financial inclusion, it's been a only recent topic for me in the last 2 years. So at the time, I was actually I was just like a normal what a corporate person, and then I was in I was despondent at the time because I could not get promoted. I mean, I was just like stuck complete. If you've had those experiences, Aziza, where you're just like totally stuck, and like I think I got 40 rejections in a year or something for other jobs. So um but as I think the universe is like sometimes there's like a bigger plan sometimes,
Yeah.
because I had those rejections and I was stuck. Like somehow I got on a project through my normal job I was like stuck in, to go to Southeast Asia, and I was parked in Singapore. That was the first time and I did a project in Vietnam, and that was the first time I was hearing about the underbanked in Southeast Asia, which is so I think some figures are like extremely high. There's millions of people in Southeast Asia who are outside of the formal banking and payment services systems, and I was like so drawn to that, and like just like the dynamics of the region, and it was like the first time I started to see the fact that like these westernized banking systems like do not fit for emerging markets, and they don't fit for poor people, because the whole system makes assumptions that it makes everything, like even to get a bank account you need stable employment, you need an address, you need stable credit, you need access to continuous access to internet, and like that's not a reality for
Yes.
people at the bottom of society. It's not a reality for emerging markets. So that was like the first time I started to open my eyes, and then I started to like study this. I would speak and people would tell me their stories, and then it was also tracking with my own lived experience of like my family not being able to have access to safe credit, so they had to go through like loan sharks, and that was a reality even where I lived. So
Yeah.
and I started to see like that the discourse I was hearing in the states where I live was like so like far removed from like millions of people's lives. It was that trip to Southeast Asia 2 years ago.
Wow. Wow. And in, it's such a scary thing to hear that also it can be so new in our minds. And honestly, when I spoke to you, that's the first time that I had that questioning of a system, and the case studies, which we'll talk about it a little bit more, that you gave at that talk at Money 2020 really stuck in my mind, and some of the examples that you shared. And I totally understand that that can come from a perspectives, a place of privilege and never having been in this situation. But then you look at, actually there's a very fine line for everyone right now in this world to go from having stability to not having stability, and being then a victim of the systems that weren't built for anyone who falls off that line. And a lot of us, and me personally, have been in those situations where, yeah, family members lost jobs. And that's a quick downturn, especially in today's world, where if you have a family, it's exceedingly difficult to have your hierarchy of needs met
Yes.
within the systems that work around us. I'd love to talk now about Money 2020 Asia a bit more in depth. You were speaking about human centered innovation, human centered design, and how it begins with women in fintech. Can you share some of the key takeaways from that talk?
Yes, I can talk a little. So the talk itself was a presentation, and I wanted to address the fact that the big trend in financial services right now, of course, is like artificial intelligence. And then the other is, of course, blockchain. But I wanted to challenge the industry to think like we can actually do so much damage if we just put like I know of course there's like of course there's regulation, you know, in either it may be less mature in certain markets, but there's regulation protecting like making sure there's diversity in data sets and et cetera and AI. But like even so, like just that we don't adopt AI because you can do so much damage with this technology if you do not properly make sure that there aren't biases, that there's diversity in the data set, there's diversity even in like the people in the decision making rooms who are deploying it. Because if you just build, what happens is because of the how is you know how everyone knows how AI works, but it starts to amplify biases into our system. Because it's working off of human like neural networks and things that are taking opinions and starting to reverberate it and if you don't have diversity in like lived experiences, like we're going to start to even perpetuate by like infinite magnitude like the inequalities that already exist in the system. That was what was driving me. And when I wrote the talk, I also, but I didn't want to just say that because when you're a financial services like you're in the audience and you're like, yeah, like who cares? Like I just want to make money. So I did it from like a business angle, showing like here's all the companies that had failed or they got sued or they had to pull back their technology because they put biases in their tech across different innovation cycles that cause them to lose market share, have a real bottom line impact. Because I thought that would, you know, if you just sit there and lecture people about how they're, you know, they're not going, unless it hits them at the bottom line, like they won't understand it.
Yeah.
So that was the reason I really wanted to reach people and reach. And if you talk to execs, it's like if you tell them there's dollars and cents that they're going to lose tied to introducing biased technology against poor, against women, against people who are underrepresented. But and yeah, that was like the crux of the talk. So I did spend a lot of time with like my coaches, like thinking about and really wanting to like reach people and have them understand like that, like not wanting to just introduce a lot of inequalities into something that already exists in the financial services ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think there's a line that you had when we spoke afterwards, and it was around chasing hype and the damage that comes from chasing hype if you don't have the thoughtfulness behind you of that human centered design, which was powerful because a lot of our conversations all around us are all mostly hype based, and we love to chase it, we love to talk about it, but to have that standout moment of somebody saying, well, actually, you need to look at this more thoughtfully, and here's the opportunities, rather than, you know, this is what you're all doing wrong. It's this is where you could get to if you actually move away from chasing this hype innovation. And I want to look at that now with you. Like, what does that look like today? That the dangers of that chased hype.
I think it's an it just when people just, or I should say decision makers at companies and organizations like want to like have fear of missing out in the states. Like I don't know if it's in the thing in like FOMO culture and just
Yeah.
adopt innovation. It doesn't even have to be AI, like anything. And well, first, like not questioning like who is left out in this technology, who are we building this for, like who's the customer persona. That one's hard to do that, and because not everyone has that kind of sensibility, but um yeah, that's the biggest one, is like who is this really, who are we building, are we continuously like building for, like to make sure like Marsha down the street in the United States can get her like coffee, her her 10
Yeah.
USD coffee order like faster or something, or is it like um but it's, I guess it's that, and like not, I guess it tends to be with people who just maybe they're not as like sophisticated in their thinking, and they just like
Yeah.
do AI everything, or whatever innovation thing happens to be the flavor of the day, and not like concretely thinking like what market am I serving. It looks like that, and I'm sure you saw a bunch of them, and I certainly did know. I love Money 2020, but I definitely did where yeah, people just like talking about AI or Web3, and like not even like understanding like the origins or the history, or how the technology works.
Yeah. And that question, who are we building for, sticks with me a lot. It's that, why aren't we asking that question more at the very beginning of anything? Who are we building for? Who are we leaving out? And I wonder where that goes then. Is it a case of more of these discussions being had? Is it a case of more stringent regulations or rule making within these organizations that are dealing with these technologies? How do we make sure that that's a starting point in people's minds?
I sort of understand. I have like a lot of people in my network who are like executives at some of a lot of financial institutions in the Western world, and in APAC as well. As you can imagine, as these like at they're not thinking like when you're at the decision making, when you're at the strategy table, they're not thinking, oh my god, like we want to like make it include, they're like, no, like we're going to lose market share to that competitor, like how do we get on this? And they're not, nobody's like thinking that, except unless you have maybe people like me in the room.
Yeah.
I think the some of the biggest things, I don't, and it's so systemic. I think, like, at least when I give talks, like, I encourage people, like, some of the biggest things you can do is, like, having a diversity of people and lived experiences at the decision making table in leadership positions. That's how you, like, getting people like me in leader, like, is how
Mm.
you affect change and hold that accountable, hold the process accountable. So you're not introducing destructive innovation. And I think I also cited that too. I think I used the example of Apple when they had released the health kit product that um, forgot to include menstrual tracking for women. When I gave that talk at Money in 2020, and one of the root causes of that was like the whole executive suite back in 2014 was, like white men, for
Yeah.
example. So that's like an example of like what happened, like how you introduce that kind of innovation that misses people. Yeah, the biggest thing is like having a diversity of lived experiences and backgrounds at the leadership table, and that's something that it has to be enforced from the top. um, but yeah, that would be my answer to that question.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's beautiful. In terms of then looking to the future, I want to ask, firstly, what would you say are some of the most outdated assumptions in finance that still dictate decision making today?
The first are there, especially in the Western world. I think in at least from my experience, I haven't worked in APAC, although I have like really strong ties there in the Asia Pacific region. But at least in the Western world, there is like almost no understanding of emerging markets. And considering a lot of MNCs are headquartered in the States, like they just deploy their technologies, and then create this like very like Western centric ideal that starts to perpetuate. So both in like even in little things like the fraud algorithms, or like how a
Mm.
mobile app like so I just give an example, like maybe like when we're deploying a technology from the States to like Asia Pacific, like for example in Asia, like it's really, as you know, you live there, like it's really common to give like cash gifts in a way that it isn't in the States, and like not like emitting that from like a mobile payment app, for example, it starts to like perpetuate like a very American centric ideal like into those markets. So
Yeah.
like zero understanding of non-Western markets and emerging markets is one. The other piece, now I should, sorry, I'm being kind of like extreme, but from my questions, like they like from my just industry conversations, it's just like use like you would be surprised, like very American centric ideals.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, the other pieces, what I had alluded to is like when people, when they're at these strategy tables or they're designing new products and coming up with ideas, it's like we have like a picture in our mind, which is like this person who has like a white collar like tech or business job who like has lives in a flat by themselves, like, and is stable income, and designing with that persona in mind, and like the flows are all like making assumptions about that, so that
Yeah.
and not forgetting that in either in different segments of the population, like the poor emerging markets, like that's not a reality. And then it creates like technology and user experiences that perpetuate this ideal consumer, and says like that's the person that you want to be like into the world. So that would be what I would challenge, is like who is this person that deserves financial services, and what do they look like? And I would argue it doesn't have to be like Western, like stable employed like white collar worker, which tends to be the person that we think of, especially in the part of the world that I live in.
Yeah, and it's so well said, because there's a beauty of having more mature systems that can now give back real uh, consumer data to paint a different picture. But going back to what you said earlier as well, there's almost a rubbish in, rubbish out side of data too. Whereas if you as a person have your own bias, your own presumptions, your own assumptions, you're putting that into a system, and
Yes.
it's continuing. And I've been in those rooms, and a lot of us, a lot of people listening to this have been in those rooms where you're building out personas, and they come based on age, location, gender, and that's what you've built it on. And some of the things that they may have shown interest on your site, or some of the products that they may use already, but there's still a gap between those who haven't even entered into your system. And that's that gap, that huge gap, that is almost terrifyingly continuous in our world today.
You
Thinking
know,
about that now. Oh, yeah, continue.
Oh,
Sorry.
it was just going back to that example too, which I gave in my talk with the Apple Health Kit. If you can imagine, it was like a room full of men. They were like designing this app, and they forgot menstruation, which was like a core part of that experience of being a woman. And of course, it launched, and like the first, it was like social media backlash. They're like, where's the menstrual tracking? And then it became this case study of, okay, this is what happens when you have like a bunch of men that designed something and then didn't cut out like half the population for something that's like something that's a big part of the lived experience. But it's like, can you imagine that like in AI? And it's something not as like in your face, but it's something as like, oh, we forgot the certain like fraud algorithms that like cut off people like under maybe a certain income level, and then like now people can't participate in innovation, or they can't participate in that product, so that like a fraud prevention product. So that is like just exemplifying on what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah, for sure. And that cash element as well, that brilliant example that you shared of the cash gifts here, and even people working abroad to try send money home to their families, and how even that missing point in a build can exterminate an opportunity for thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. When we look at the future then, what are some emerging trends that you're keeping a close eye on?
So in financial services, I mean, I could speak broad. Like, there's two, of course. So there's with AI, and right now the big discourse is around agentic AI. Like, so what a lot of futurists are saying is that, and it should be happening soon. Is that in the future it's going to be AI bots who are paying on your behalf, or AI bots paying each other's someone else's AI bots, and how has the potential to create new payment rails and payment experiences. So for example, instead of you, Aziza, like going and like buying your flight ticket to visit your family in like Ireland, instead like your AI bot is going to do it, and they're going to be making that payment on your behalf. And the other big trend, of course, is stable coins. We just had the Genius Act passed in the States, and a lot of watershed regulation in Hong Kong, for example, and countries following. I would still like challenge this industry though, like with making sure we don't forget about people in all segments of the population, particularly those that are underrepresented, as we embrace all of these new innovations.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And I want to go into now looking at some of your experience. You've worked across continents, you've scaled financial services for millions, you've invested in what's next. If somebody is trying to build for the future of finance, especially in those underserved markets that we've spoken about, what tools or mindset do they need to pack with them?
The first, I think the first is like for and I would encourage companies, like, again, is like making sure you are holding yourself accountable, that there's a diversity of people in the room when you're making big decisions, strategic decisions, or investment decisions, or product design decisions, and not just in terms of like race, gender, or sexual orientation. It was like as well as like class experiences. So those financial class experiences. So those that's what the biggest thing when you're building for diverse markets. And then in emerging markets, it's just important not to like transpose Western technologies. So as much as possible, having a cultural understanding of the market and its nuances, and yeah, I'm speaking right now to my peers who are in like the big Western financial services companies, like not to just transpose your technology, because often it won't work, and it'll either not be adopted because it won't work, or further like celebrating like a really I'm a proud American. It's just like celebrating a Western ideal and then starting to eradicate like local culture, for example. So that's what I would say. Yeah, when you're
Yeah,
building for emerging markets.
thank you. And in your life personally, how do you stay open to rethinking? How do you continuously stay open to change?
So the first is I actually really embrace failure, or when things don't go well, because it's so cheesy, but those things are always learning experiences. The second thing I have with this is, and this really changed my life and it really supercharged my career, but I started to look at my career like a startup. I started to manage it like a startup. And what I mean by that is not just I was like hustling for the sake of hustling, but like looking at thinking of yourself as a CEO or a founder, and you're going and like mapping the labor market, trying to see how you can position yourself where you can dominate a market, and you can do it with like the assets you have as a person. So that was the other big thing. And then having like a sense of paranoia, like a founder too, that you're just you're not always complacent. So those are things that I've done to be kind of open and hungry, and like be willing to be successful. So
Love that. Love that so much. And my final question to you, one piece of advice that you would like to give to your future self?
I would, let's see, I would say just to be open to like what's in front of me, and like when things happen that don't go my way, often that there's like a bigger picture that you don't always see. So that, yeah, I would say just being open to like what's in front, like life. Sometimes there's a bigger picture that you don't know, and like you have to go through a difficult experience to like have sometimes either to learn something or it ends up panning out better in the end. And that's what happened to me. I would never have gone to Southeast Asia if I didn't have like that year of like rejection and failure.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for all that you do, Samantha Lee. It has been wonderful to speak to you.
Thank you so much, and take care. Talk to you soon.